Tēnā koutou. E whānau mai au ki Aotearoa, I tupu aki au ki Waihopai, ko Pōrua ahau I noho ana, ko whakaratonga iwi ahau, ahui I mahei ana, ko Brendan Tokawingoa, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora, good morning to our Australians and good afternoon to our Kiwis. Thank you for joining us for this presentation. And while we'd originally planned to hold this event back in May in Christchurch, current world events, i.e. COVID, have prevented us from proceeding as planned. It's great to see the heaps of you that have joined us online today as we bring you the second in a two-part series of webinars showcasing the work of the 2019 Leading Practice and Mental Health Award winners, which were Fire and Rescue New South Wales and ourselves, Fire and Emergency New Zealand. My name is Brendan Nelly. I'm the Deputy Chief Executive of People at Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event and introduce our speakers. Lorna O'Dwyer, Human Resources Manager from AFAC, will host the Q&A session with our speakers at the conclusion of their presentation. But before we begin, and on behalf of AFAC, I'd like to thank Stewart Heaton Clothing Company for their generous sponsorship of this event. Stewart Heaton partnered with AFAC in April 2018 to recognise agencies that are at the forefront of leading practice in this space. Through this partnership, AFAC created the Leading Practice and Mental Health Award, which is awarded annually. Stewart Heaton aimed to support an industry culture that adopts leading practice and spreads the benefits of innovative and creative mental health initiatives across all first responders in Australasia. Through the generous sponsorship of Stewart Heaton, award winners choose the topic of the annual masterclass event. I'll introduce our speakers shortly, but before I do, I'd like to provide you with some brief housekeeping notes. Today's event will be recorded and made available along with the presentation slides after the event. Today, we'll be using the Q&A feature on Zoom to take questions, so please post your questions in the Q&A box. So not the chat window, the little box in the middle there that's got Q&A on it. You'll be able to upvote questions by clicking the thumbs up button, and Lorna will do her absolute best to ask a number of these questions to our speakers in the question session following the presentation. I encourage you to use the chat window to share any thoughts or reflections during the presentations. And just a reminder that you'll need to select all panelists and attendees in that drop-down menu for everyone attending today to view your messages. I would also like to remind you to please be respectful to each other and our presenters when posting your comments and questions, because everyone can see them and it is a respectful environment. So please join me in welcoming our speakers for today. So first up, we've got Alison Barnes, Manager of Health, Safety and Wellbeing at Civil Aviation Authority here in New Zealand. Alison Barnes has more than 30 years experience in workplace health and safety and wellbeing, predominantly in health emergency services and public sector environments. Her background includes injury and illness management, psychological health, collaborative influence and program development, and people-centric design. Alison is inspired to build workplaces that not only prevent harm, but also focusing on enhancing the health and well-being of their people. Alison was until recently Manager of People Safety and Support at Fire and Emergency New Zealand, and is currently the Health Manager, Safety and Wellbeing at the Civil Aviation Authority of New Zealand. Alison was a colleague of mine for many years, and I can assure you she's very experienced and very knowledgeable in this space. Also joining us is Andy Chappell. He's a Safety, Health and Wellbeing Team Leader for the North Island for Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Andy joined the team, which was the fire service team, in 2003 as a career firefighter. He became involved in health and safety as both a station health and safety rep and as an accident investigator. Andy's completed his graduate diploma in occupational safety and health through Massey University in 2012. He's worked externally for a district council part-time and on casual contracts for a training company that focused on health and safety consultancy whilst continuing his full-time role as a career firefighter. The increased exposure to trauma-related incidents by firefighters in 2014 and the suicide of a close friend of his and his brother-in-law saw his focus shift to the psychological well-being of firefighters. He took on a full-time role in the Safety, Health and Wellbeing team with FENZ in 2017 as regional advisor and currently leads the Te Ika a Maui Safety, Health and Wellbeing team. For our Australian colleagues, that's the Māori term for the North Island. He leads the North Island Safety, Health and Wellbeing team. He became involved in the delivery of the psychological workshops that Alison will talk to in 2019 and has delivered workshops to both operational and non-operational personnel. At this point, I was going to hand over to Alison and Andy, but I just want to make a comment off script that if ever wellbeing issues needed to be underlined, they were underlined for us here on Saturday night. Andy will touch on it a wee bit in his presentation, but we lost another career firefighter to suicide here on Saturday night. And the team that were working to support that firefighter, my team, and those around them are really feeling the loss. So not that the well-being of our people needs to be underlined, but it was further underlined for us on Saturday night, a recent and very painful loss. So at this point, I'm going to stop speaking and welcome you all on board quarterly, and I'll hand over to Alison and Andy. Thank you and kia ora.
Hello. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you very much for your welcome. And I'd also just like to acknowledge that most of us probably will have experienced some sort of family or personal or workplace loss related to wellbeing concerns. And that is one of the drivers for the work that we undertake. So just want to acknowledge that from the beginning. And thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about our journey with establishing one avenue through these wellbeing workshops of supporting our people and aiming to get out to everybody. So I wanted to entitle this an adaptive challenge because it has required constant review and adaptation and new ideas in the way we do things. So the challenge on the first slide is about the growing concern and evidence that there was about wellbeing issues from within our organisation, but also across the whole of New Zealand. And I'm sure this situation is similar in Australia, that we were very conscious as a nation of the concerns that there were in the community. And as 14,000 people in Fire and Emergency New Zealand, we were reflective of those concerns and the trauma that goes along with them. We saw also our personal situation within Fire and Emergency was influenced by the changing number and type of medical resuscitation calls that we were going to. And this varied around the country. Some volunteer brigades were still doing roughly the same number of calls that they were doing, but in some parts of the country, there were increases in the number of medical calls that people were going to from between 38% and over 1,500% in the course of a very short time, over about 18 months, and in the years that followed. So it's been very difficult with our people going to more difficult calls, often suicides, where they were required to work more closely with people. The challenge was also around our budget and our time and our resources that we had to put into this wellbeing area. There was a change in the New Zealand workplace safety environment too, where the new legislation that came in 2015 was very much focused on including wellbeing, psychological wellbeing, along with health, physical health. So a lot of these things influenced the challenge that there was and what we were going to do around supporting our people differently. And of course, the challenge of about 646 workplaces across the length and breadth of New Zealand. So the deeper issue that we were looking at, which is the next slide, was about how did we approach this challenge? We've got a fantastic legacy within fire and emergency in New Zealand of being able to rise to technical challenges. A lot of our people are hugely experienced and they're action oriented. So present them with a challenge and let's look at it and find a way to deal with it and move on. But this, looking at psychological well-being, required a different sort of response. There wasn't a one size fits all, or the ability to say, there's the problem, let's deal with it in this way. We had to look much more broadly. So there was impatience within the organisation with perceived lack of response, particularly from senior people. And so that meant that a lot of very good but fragmented ideas and offerings sprung up around the country. Good people who wanted to do good things for their people, but they weren't cohesive and joined together. So that was part of the deeper issue. And there was some limitations in understanding that this was an adaptive challenge for us, that there wasn't a single solution. So it required input from so many people and a lot more testing and trying out and going back to the drawing board again. The leadership vision and support was needed for a new direction. And at the time, before we became Fire and Emergency in New Zealand, we didn't necessarily have the people and the resources to explore and probe and develop and test. And as it says on the slide, to adapt and test and adapt again. We we didn't have budget, and we had access to clinical expertise, but we didn't have the budget necessarily to make the most of that. So there are many things. We had lots of genuine, caring people, but this presented a deeper issue of being an adaptive challenge. So when Fire and Emergency came along and we became one organisation, we had resources to begin exploring this in a different way. So the next slide is about learning together. So we started with a vision for what we needed to do around growing our understanding and leadership around psychological well-being. And one of the quotes that was the founding quote for the beginning of this work was, the people can't perform at their best in an unwell environment. And the role of people leaders, and there's different sorts of people leaders, is to build and nurture a climate of well-being. So people leaders are those who are leaders by position, but we also, and Andy will touch on it more, we also learned very quickly that some of the most significant people leaders are those who are leaders by influence rather than by position. They are influential with their colleagues, and they are influential in their smaller workplaces and not necessarily right across the country. So one of the things we had to do was establish an experienced group of people who had a broad understanding of the organisation. And we had to have a vision and a goal for the outcomes that we wanted out of developing these workshops and a broader wellbeing platform, but we couldn't have a fixed approach. We had to be open and adaptive. We used subject matter experts, both within the operational setting and professionals externally, and they were both really supportive and at times challenging. The good thing about working with subject matter experts is that they are experts and they know us and they have opinions. And the hard thing about working with subject matter experts is they are experts and they know something about us and they all have different opinions. So that was quite a challenge too, about learning together. Some of the learning was serendipitous. I attended the Mental Health and Wellbeing Network at AFAC during 2018, I think it was, when we were first developing this. And the serendipity of being presented with a video of firefighters using psychological wellbeing support in an operational setting was such a good find that we were able to incorporate into the workshops, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We had to look for a range of models and tools that would give our leaders by position and leaders by influence the background and the framework to have conversations, or to help them, or to feel that they were doing things that were good and helpful for people. We had to really persevere in the face of difficulties, because lots of people had different opinions on how things should be done, and there were budgets to attend to, and there were particular viewpoints to convince people about that this was worth pursuing. So again, it was part of that whole adaptive challenge, but we had a commitment from within the team and from within those who were doing the work to learn and review and adapt again. So the key elements of the workshop that was finally developed, and I shouldn't say finally developed because it continues to evolve today. So if we can look at the next slide. So these are the key elements that were part of the workshop. We had a very clear vision and purpose for the workshop, 5 very simple objectives that we wanted to advance everybody's learning and confidence in supporting well-being, the well-being of their people. We had a good basis of data and strategy within the workplace and the legal basis and good models of care. We used a psychological first aid model that had been used in the organisation for a little while, but the workshops enabled us to socialise that and really learn and practice and understand that in a way we hadn't necessarily been able to do before. And we were able to make it very much our organisational model by using scenarios and making it relevant within the workshops. We used subject matter expertise on clinical psychology, and we had Maori and Pacifica advice as well when we looked at different models of care. So we looked at several different models, one being the 5 ways to wellbeing, one being the mental health continuum that's used a lot in Defence Forces, and the other being a uniquely New Zealand and Pacifica model, Te Whare Tapa Whā, which is about 4 pillars and 4 walls to hold us up as people. And those models were really helpful in explaining self-care and looking after others. We used the firefighter video, as I mentioned before, and we looked at multiple real scenarios. So we got scenarios from our people so that when they practiced using the models, and particularly the Manners psychological first aid model, they were able to apply it in a way that was relevant to the operational situation or to non-operational leadership as well. There was a lot about sustained energy that's needed in presenting workshops. So there were physical activities and fun and humour throughout the presentations, and lots of time for reflection and action planning and looking at conversation starters. The next bit, I'm just going to talk a little bit about development and delivery. So the main focus of the workshops on the next slide was really about trying to seek some growth and some change in mindsets for our people and for us at the same time. So even if people knew a lot about this subject, we wanted to move them on a little bit in their skill set or their understanding. So face-to-face was absolutely essential in terms of our delivery model. It was really important that we were able to engage with people. We had 2 pilot sessions using the safety, health and wellbeing team, and then wider teams and operational people. And some of the feedback on those were pretty tough, but ultimately the feedback was gold. It really enabled us to refine and develop the workshop in a different way. We developed common language within the workshop so that people could express some of the things they knew or they were feeling. We used accessible quotes and we used tools. One of the things that was really important in delivery was the crucial facilitator role. We didn't have the luxury of being able to have 2 people from the team or a separate facilitator in every workshop. So the facilitator needed to be a subject matter expert too, because of the way the material needed to be developed and because of a lot of the things that people shared within the workshop. They needed to be people who weren't afraid of emotion, but also knew how to manage that within the context of people within workshops. We learned how important food was to giving people time together and time to network and reflect and share and wind down. We took train the trainer sessions for leaders and supporters, and particularly with those who were leaders by influence, so union reps and health and safety reps and peer supporters and people who had a natural connection with people. And we had clinical psychology advice and endorsement right throughout the development. So we're just going to look at the key factors in success of the workshops. And of course, there's always things that we're learning. So the next slide, the foundation of the key factors for success was about being able to learn together and learn from each other. Could you just put up the next slide, please? Thank you. So that slide, the foundation of developing the workshops was about learning from each other. And we had to continue to be adaptable and being able to try new safe to fail things. So things that we could probe and learn and do things differently, adapt the size and the shape of the workshops and some of the material, and Andy will talk about that. And we also wanted to build on the past. There is a Maori whakatauki that says ka mua ka muri, and the direct translation of that is walking backwards into the future. But it actually means to walk into the future with a secure knowledge of the good things that have happened in the past and carry that with you. So that there's that concept of building everything that is good and worthwhile that people have been doing for a long time, but building on that into what we were doing. So that required ongoing collaboration and drive and vision. And one of the key factors in success was delivery from people who look like me, and not like me personally, of course, but being able to have people like Andy who are firefighters who deliver to firefighters. Or if I was doing the delivery, having somebody who was operational sharing that delivery with me or standing alongside me, so that they felt that the people who were talking to them could either actually relate to them or not pretend to understand all aspects of their role, but be curious questioners. We wanted to make it relevant, the idea of the group photo effect. If you take a group photo, the first thing that people do is they look for themselves in that photo. And if they can't see themselves or somebody who looks like them, they disengage. So we wanted that concept of the group photo effect to be part of it. We wanted people to see themselves and what they do in the work that we were doing and in the presentation. We also incorporated, some of you may be aware of Aristotle's analysis of persuasion, which was developed something like 320 years BC. And it talks about logos, ethos, and pathos. If you want to persuade people, you can have the right words. So logos being the root word around words and understanding. So the right words, the right data, the right information. If you want to persuade some people, you will have the right ethos. So there'll be credibility about the people who are presenting the information, either because they're firefighters or because of their background. So people have to find that there's credibility in the presenters. And if you want to persuade some people, you'll have the right pathos or the right connection with people. So the root word for empathy and sympathy. So what's the connection that the presenter and the information has with those people? And if you want to persuade most of the people, you'll have all three of those things as part of your workshop or your presentation. So you'll have the right logos, words and information. You'll have the right ethos or credibility, and you'll have the right pathos or connection with your people. And so we wanted to incorporate that understanding in the way the workshops developed. And we also had the fantastic teamwork around us, where the workbook that was developed was great. There were great resources and tools, and people felt valued. And we wanted to be willing to change and learn and make things fresh and relevant to our people. And we also wanted to make it meaningful for people and make connections with them. So looking at reflections and looking ahead, and so the next slide, I'm no longer with Fire and Emergency, but these lessons carry through, and Andy, again, will talk about that in a minute. It was really important that we utilise leaders by influence, and I think that's really important in any adaptive challenge, and understanding that so much of your culture changes with the people you relate to side by side, not necessarily just with leadership. On reflection, there were overwhelmingly positive responses to the workshops. There were a few criticisms and things that we needed to change and adapt, but by and large, the responses have been really positive. The workshops have raised the level of expertise across people, or else tapped into the expertise that was already there and just given people confidence to use language that is common to all of us in the way they express things. We had lots of people who wanted to be part of helping to lead, and that was really important, that we incorporated that interest where we could. I think I delivered, I can't remember exactly, I was part of the delivery of about 60 workshops. And I can honestly say every single workshop was different, with something new that I learned every time, with different groups, from the smallest being 3 people through to much bigger workshops, and through to from people who are new to the organisation and right through to the chief executive and executive leadership team. So over those workshops, I learned that I had to hand things over and not hang on to things. I had to hold my vision lightly and understand it wasn't my own. This was an adaptive challenge, so the vision belonged to everybody who was part of that and continues to be part of it. So I'd just like to finish and hand over to Andy with the final slide. Just coming back to the quote that I used at the beginning, that people can't perform at their best in an unwell environment. And the role of us as people leaders is to build and nurture a climate of well-being. And that's an ongoing conversation. So the workshops are part of a whole framework of well-being support that's designed to encourage and normalise conversations about well-being, and to encourage people to seek early support and to proactively seek out their peers or seek out professionals as they need help. So the ultimate aim is for every conversation, every training course, every review, every project, every new initiative going forward will consider the well-being of our people and what we are doing and what we continue to do. Thank you very much for your time. I'd like to hand over to my colleague, Andy Chappell. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and kia ora koutou katoa to all you people tuning in. Greetings and welcome to you all. What I want to start with, I'll just go over a timeline that shows some of the key events and milestones that we've had over the past 23 months, and I guess since my involvement in the delivery of the workshops. I'll touch along on some of these as I go through the other slides. But before I sort of get cracking, I'd just like to acknowledge Alison and the huge amount of work that she's done to get this workshop both to be realised, and she allowed me, I guess, early on to be involved in the delivery. So I know she won't like me saying it, but a huge thank you to you, Alison, for allowing this to happen, and I guess your vision and the vision of others becoming a reality. So if we move to the next slide, and we'll look at, I guess, the team that has delivered these workshops. So originally we started, and Alison touched on it a little bit, around 2 presenters. So herself and a woman called Pam Finney. facilitated the early workshops that we just delivered and I guess the pilots. They also trained our safety, health and wellbeing team. We did this down in Wellington over a couple of days, and this allowed the safety, health and wellbeing team to co-present, and those that weren't happy to present would co-present. So it eased the burden on Alison and Pam, and it allowed us to, I guess, increase where we could deliver and how quick we could respond when people asked for it. Early on as well, there's a lot of logistics that went into delivering these workshops. So we looked at employing a full-time project coordinator, and Lisa Grant came on board early on, and as it says, it shows in the timeline, early in 2018. So, and I'd like to say a massive thanks to Lisa, because she makes sure that when our presenters turn up to the workshops, and all the resources are usually there, and specifically me, I have a special dietary request of sausage rolls for morning tea, and Lisa always ensures that there's at least one waiting for me. She's also, sometimes it's a struggle. We've had hiccups with delivery of stuff that's turned up at the local Foursquare, or it turns up a day too late. But the other thing Lisa is incredibly good at doing is ensuring that not only my dietary requirement of a sausage roll is met, that there's always food there. We've learned, and any firefighter will tell you, if you feed them, most of the other complaints will go away. We also learned that the burden on Pam and Alison, you know, they had other roles to fulfill within the organisation, so we needed to put in a full-time facilitator. And this allowed, so someone dedicated to doing it full-time, travelling around the country, delivering the workshops when we needed them. Once they were employed, it allowed the rest of us, or the rest of the team, to supplement where we could, specifically when the workshops were close to home or close to the location where we were. Also as well, like Te Hiku, so Te Hiku is, I guess, the upper North Island, so Northland and Auckland, and a huge chunk of our people reside in Auckland, especially our career firefighters. So we're also focused on delivering to there. So we decided to train co-presenters within that cohort, and these people came from our peer supporters, our NZPFU, the Firefighters Union, and other firefighters, and they needed to be, as Alison said, people with mana and integrity, and people that looked like the people that we were delivering to. We've since replicated this down in the South Island. So I think last week we held interviews for lead facilitator down there, and we also trained some co-presenters based on the same thing. These people needed to have mana, they needed to have integrity. If you move to the next slide. What we started early on, we set a statement of performance expectations. So for those that are unfamiliar with statement of performance expectations, or SPEs, they set out how we will perform and lets us measure against those expectations. It enables us to the responsible minister, in our case, Tracy Martin, to participate in setting the annual performance expectations of a Crown entity, which is Fire and Emergency New Zealand. And it allows Parliament to be informed of those expectations and provides a base against which actual performance can be assessed. Now, we set this SPE at 70% of our leaders, and we just define those leaders, as Alison touched on, as by position or by influence. By position, we're talking about within our operational ranks, sort of station officer and above. So it's the people that sit in the front left seat of the trucks and make some of the decisions on the fire ground, and as it went up through the rank structure in our organisation. We also looked at the leaders by influence. These are the people that had significant influence or interaction with our people. So I guess those forward-facing people that sat within our non-operational staff. And I'll discuss a little bit later the challenges in hitting that original SPE and why we changed it a little bit later. Because we did change it. As you can see on the slide, we refocused it to 2,000 people. And in that first year, we actually got to 1991. Go to the next slide, please. So right from the start, as Alison has said, this has been an adaptive challenge. One of our area managers, a gentleman by the name of Mark Tinworth, said, hey, if you guys are going to do this, why can't I have it for my operational crews here in Hamilton? So right from the start, I guess the playing field changed. And as you can see from the quote, and it's direct from Mark, it says, we're all leaders in welfare of both ourselves and our colleagues. So he wanted to make sure that his people had the skills and the knowledge to help, not only help themselves, but help their colleagues and help their mates. So we organised 4 workshops in Hamilton over 4 days amongst the four watches. And the first workshop coincided with Lisa's, I guess, start with fire and emergency. And I'll say, and I won't go into the huge details, but it was a bit of a baptism of fire. It went smoothly, but I guess the balance between me, Alison, and Lisa was sort of, I'll say there were some teething problems around, but since then, we're, I guess, all great mates, but I guess it started, I think Lisa forgot something, Alison forgot something, and I had to sort of back and stood for the whole time and made everyone look like I was uncomfortable. But we got through it. And I guess that's where our journey began. One of our anxieties early on was whether or not a full day course would actually suit our frontline people. And after the feedback on that first day, they said, don't change a thing. We want it exactly how it is. Move to this next slide. When we look at our workshop options, we gave people pretty much 3 options: a full day 8-hour course, a half day 4-hour course, or 2x2. So 2 hours specifically targeted our volunteers. We would do 2 hours on one training night, come back a week later and do another 2 hours. We always push for the full day 8-hour course. It's just that it gives more opportunity for discussion, and there's some great discussions that go in it. But obviously you can't always demand, especially with our volunteers, that they attend something for 8 hours. They always already give up a huge amount of time. And so sometimes the 4-hour or the 2x2 suits them better. The workshops are ideally suited to sort of 12 to 20 participants. And it means that there can be some good discussion without sort of honing in on 1 or 2 people. But obviously, sometimes that doesn't suit all people. And we've looked at and we held down in the Deep South what I've referenced as the super sessions, where we've had 40 odd people plus, and it just meant we need a few more table facilitators to get that discussion. But that's what suited the people. So that's what we've tried to do the whole way through, is have a workshop that suits the people we're delivering it to, as opposed to the people delivering it. We've also had a leadership development course that we've incorporated a 3.5-hour component in there. The beauty of that is they don't get any call outs. All our other workshops are generally done to operational people that are on call. So we don't get any of that. So it means the timings can be a bit tighter. If we move to the next slide. So what feedback have we got? So early on, and especially as we delivered to the operational crews, and as Alison said, they needed to have an operational focus. And the memorandum of understanding with St. John's and Wellington Free Ambulance significantly changed that medical response. So our people said, hey, we need someone or people, especially in our co-preventers, that have lived and breathed what we're going through, so we have that credibility. So, and I guess that is shown how we adapted with our teams and added those people in later. Our peer support teams as well, up and down the country, have responded to this and been included. Sometimes we've brought them in specifically on the training nights where we've had them, just to add that little bit of balance. They know the people where we're going into to deliver these workshops, and sometimes the conversations after we leave, they can just link in and make sure that people, you know, it brings up some stuff that's tough for our people, and I guess they've got to face, because sometimes I guess our lead facilitator is not always going to be in town for the coming days, when some people have a chance to reflect and actually have some further questions. So, and I guess that was sort of made evident to me when in the aftermath of Whakaari White Island, where we'd been into Whakatane to deliver the workshop earlier that year, and then I guess after the aftermath of that terrible tragedy, our peer supporters were well known to the brigade, and they could sort of sit and what one of my colleagues refers to as actively loiter, and just pick up those little conversations, and we were able to support people that needed that support post that event. The workshops are, I guess, as Alison said, they evolve and they're all different, and they're always different. I've done probably 30 or 40 of these things, and nothing is the same. And sometimes that can be slow, and sometimes it can be really fast paced, and people want to share their ideas. And because it involves people to be vulnerable, and vulnerability can be tough, and certainly we're a male dominated organisation, and we still have that feeling that if you share your feelings, then you're weak. And I always think that it takes tremendous courage to be vulnerable amongst your peers. So I always find that the richness that comes out of those workshops is huge. And there's a whole stigma that we need to break down around this stuff. So the more people can be, I guess, vulnerable within the workshops, the more successful they are. And I know for me especially, the conversation is my favourite part. When people share their emotions and their willingness to share, it's inspiring, and it's really humbling. And I think it's a real privilege, I guess, to hear the stories, and I've heard many stories, and Alison's heard many stories where people have been vulnerable and have shared their raw emotion at times. But I guess all the workshops, and we set it out at the start, there's always real compassion, there's always real love in the room. So it's always in a safe environment. And I think the more we can talk about some of the stuff that we discussed, the more it is out in the open. But overall, the feedback is, there's been a couple of times where I had one gentleman sit with his forehead on the desk for 8 hours, and then at the end popped up his head and said, great lunch. So there's been some challenges on the way, and if you move to the next slide, I'll discuss some of them further. So getting resources and people across our 600 fire stations can turn into a logistical nightmare, but thankfully we have Lisa, and the multiple flights, the long car journeys, and getting to more isolated brigades, she's enabled that, and the rest of the team has made that really easy. And the perfect example of that is Kaikoui in Northland. So the brigade wanted 2 of those 2x2 things. So I fortunately grew up in the north, so I went and visited mum and dad, and were able to deliver those workshops there. But it meant, logistically, it's a bit of a nightmare to come to our more isolated brigades, and hence why we started those super sessions in the south. And again, I touched on earlier, most of our workshops are delivered to operational crews, and while they're still available to respond. So in a moment's notice, the room clears as the alarm sound, and they respond to emergency. And I guess the facilitator is left going, how do I juggle it when they come back? How long are they going to be away? We try to get a gauge of how long they're going to be away by listening to the call, and see what the details are. And most of the time, I think there's been only a couple of sessions where we've said, actually, we're not going to be able to complete this. Also, Fire and Emergency has gone through a significant amount of change since it was formed in 2017. And setting up a new organisation is always challenging. And trying to deliver workshops and grab people's attention was sometimes hard. And that's why we did change the SPE to reflect these challenges. Also, as I did talk about earlier, it was changed to 2,000 people, and we've changed. I think we've done that again this year. So rather than focus on those leaders, it's 2,000 people across the organisation, because as Mark identified early on, all our people can benefit from the workshop. Other challenges we faced, if you move to the next slide, as being inclusive within the workshop can be difficult. There's no silver bullet for psychological wellbeing, and in acknowledging people's personal journeys and allowing them space and time to be as involved or as little or as much as possible can be hard. And as I said, sometimes people don't engage, like my friend that sat with his head on the desk, and that can be really hard when you're facilitating that. Think, well, they're not listening. It's you just got to persevere, because at least hopefully one person within within the workshop will hear one thing that may help them. And as I highlighted earlier as well, different brigades want different length of workshop, and that can be a real challenge to try and accommodate that. Also, on I think a handful of times for me, people have their own agenda, and they come with, I guess, a motive or their narrative that they want to get across, because they didn't feel supported, or they thought we hadn't or weren't doing enough. And this can be really difficult. And I usually find by acknowledging their concerns, and then you empower them to take up the challenge to ensuring that our workplaces are psychologically safe, then often they're a valuable resource for the remainder of the workshop. And you can help them steer the conversation, because usually they're often people that other firefighters sort of look to for guidance. We certainly didn't win them all over. And some people, I guess, with this stuff, we'll never win over. But I think on a whole, it's been fantastic, and most people have had huge buy-in. Sometimes as well, I guess the content, and it depends on people's personal journey, and sometimes we don't know it going in. It does just smack you in the eyes. And I know for me, hearing people's stories brings back emotions of, I guess, everyone's journey. And I think Brendan touched on in my bio at the start, I've had, some people close to me die through suicide. So at times, I know when I've been delivering the workshop, I've paused because someone said something, and I'll think, oh, here we go, Andy, sort of tears start to well up. But by the time you get through it, and as I say, it's only people that know me really well that would see me pause. But you just, at the end of it, you realise and you reflect what an amazing opportunity you've had to share your journey with others, and that you can play a role in helping them through their psychological journey, I guess, to wellbeing. Probably the biggest challenge, and if we move to the next slide, was this thing called COVID-19. So I won't dwell on it too much. I'm sure you all are well aware of it. But during COVID and New Zealand's lockdown into levels 4 and 3, our big focus for the organisation was ensuring that our trucks and our people were able to respond to the emergencies. So delivering a workshop, and on the slide it says kanohe ki te kanohe, which means face-to-face. So this workshop doesn't really work online. It needs that involvement and people to share their journey, and they just don't do it online. So pretty much the whole workshops went on hold during that time, and I guess our full-time team members were redeployed elsewhere, either look after the welfare of people within the organisation through lockdown, and for Lisa specifically the unexpected, I guess, influenza season that came earlier than we expected, and I guess the vaccine program that we roll out. During the coming out of level 4 and 3, and when we got back to 1, that's where we managed to train our South Island teams, and then obviously we've gone back to level 2 and juggled around. But COVID has placed us some huge challenges, and I guess some of the SBE would have been changed around that as well. And if we move to the last slide, which is our future. So we still have work to do. We still have a big chunk of work to do, and I guess specifically it's in our volunteer space. So our volunteers represent the biggest cohort of our organisation. They're about 12,000 strong, and that's where, and they're in isolated places, and they're hard to get to. So hence why we've expanded our team, but we need to ensure that they have the opportunity to participate in the workshop. And so we can embed those psychological wellbeing components in them as well. We've also looked to embed these in our training programs. So we've able to establish a regular time slot for our career recruits, some of our volunteer executive courses, and some of our leadership courses. And we're also hoping we're currently in our last career recruit course of the year, hope to get in front of the families at the end to just discuss a family package that we've developed that we haven't really had a chance to roll out due to COVID-19. But hopefully I get to spend 10, 15 minutes talking to the families and seeing what support mechanisms we've got. I guess from the start, and as Alison said, it's an adaptive challenge, and from the start we've come so far, but we still have a long way to go. And I guess that was, And Brendan sort of touched on at the start, that sort of really hit home on the weekend when I received a phone call to inform me that one of our firefighters had tragically died. So what I want to do now, if I can just ask if we pause and reflect before we take questions on the lives of our fellow firefighters and other emergency service workers throughout Australasia that have lost their battle with mental health. And then after that, can I ask that we just personally, and I mean this personally, do everything in your power and your influence to provide a positive alternative to suicide. So we can just pause now and reflect for a few moments. Thanks. And before we take questions, I'll just say, like, I'm really proud to be part of this workshop. I feel privileged to be able to deliver it. And I guess we at Fire and Emergency are committed to improving the psychological outcomes of our people. And I'll leave you with a quote of a thing that says, kia kaha, kia mai, kia manawa nui, which means be strong, be steadfast, be willing. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, and thank you, Andy, for a great presentation and great insights. I am Lorna O'Dwyer, Human Resources Manager with AFAC, and I work closely with the Mental Health and Wellbeing Group. To begin, I wish to start by acknowledging that I am hosting this session from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all join us from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters across Australia. I'll be your host for the Q&A, and I encourage you to enter your questions into the Q&A box, and I do have a few there. So given that I've actually got quite a few, I will jump straight to those questions. Alison mentioned 5 objectives for the program, but didn't elaborate. What exactly were they, please?
Sure, thank you. So we had 5 very simple objectives that people assessed themselves on at the beginning of the workshop, and then they assessed themselves again at the end of the workshop. And they were related to our objectives for the program, and they assessed themselves on a scale of 1 to 10, and they were very, very simple. So the first one was, I understand my leadership responsibilities to support psychological well-being. So where were you on that scale of understanding at the start of the workshop? The second one was, I can recognise early indicators of need in myself. And again, marking yourself, I can recognise early indicators of need in my people or my colleagues, depending on whether you're a leader by position or influence. The third one was, I know how to access the appropriate level of support for myself and for others. And the fifth one, sorry, that was the fourth one. And the fifth one is, I feel confident in being able to start wellbeing conversations with my people or my colleagues. So as you can see, they were really simple. Those were the things that we were trying to achieve through the workshop, and we got people to mark where they were on that scale at the beginning and then again at the end.
How do you plan to roll out the workshops to volunteers? Is face-to-face an option for everyone?
I'll answer first, and then Andy, you might like to step in from where things are now. But we have been rolling them out to volunteers almost from the first half dozen workshops. So we are doing, volunteers are interspersed with career firefighters, and yes, the preferred model is face-to-face. But we do have, I forgot to say, one of the key features of the workshop is that we have clinical psychological expertise, and we videoed one of our senior clinical psychologists so that we can use that rather than having to take them in person to all the workshops, and particularly to the volunteer ones. But those options, Andy, maybe you talk about the options, because they are particularly to accommodate volunteers, aren't they?
Yeah, and I guess we've the volunteer ones I've done, we've done the 8-hour ones, and we've usually done them on a weekend. and we've squeezed the 4-hour one into a night. It's a bit of a long night, but we've done it at those 2x2s. But basically, I'd say if you want us to deliver this workshop to you, just book it in and we will come.
Okay, and then Alison, you mentioned resources and the workbook. Are these available online somewhere or only once you attend a workshop?
Andy might like to comment on that because I'm a little bit out of the loop now, but with certainly the things that we refer to, like the psychological the first aid model, the manners workbook is online and available, and I presume that we can pass that on. But Andy, can you comment on whether the actual workbook, which has got all the models and particularly Te Whare Tapa Whā and the explanation for those, is that available online for people, or is it only through Lisa and the workshops?
I don't know. I have to check, but I think it's only through the workshop and Lisa. And I know, I guess, and I prefer is you deliver the workshop and then the workbook goes with it. So some of the things we can explain in I guess, greater detail. But it's certainly something I can find out how widely available that book is or whether we can put it online. But I think it goes hand in hand with the workshop, and I guess I'd certainly prefer the opportunity to deliver the workshop with the book as opposed to give the book out as a resource just as a standalone.
Because some things require a bit of an explanation, don't they, Andy? Like things like the position of your feet don't really mean much without an explanation that goes with it. So, yeah.
And another question, what was the video, Alison, that you mentioned for career fighting using PFA in the field with colleagues? Can you share it?
Again, Andy, step in, but the video was one that was developed by Fire and Rescue South Australia. I think that's what they're called.
Is it what if I can't cope? Is that the one?
Yep.
Yes, that's the one that we've used, and it's been a defining moment for a lot of people and a lot of in capturing their attention, hasn't it, Andy? Because even though it isn't us, and there's often a little bit of ribbing about being Australian, but once they get over that, it's such a good teaching tool. Whatever people draw out of that video, whether they think it's good, bad, or indifferent, is a teaching point, isn't it, Andy?
It certainly is, and I guess there's some operational, I'll say, tasks that they perform that people question and have a bit of a laugh, but I guess the message really resonates with our people, even, if anyone's seen it down to arguing over who stole someone's yogurt out of the fridge. It's like that's what happens on fire stations at times. It's more usually over ice cream, but yeah, food is a big part of a firefighter's life.
Okay, great. And if I do actually have a copy of that, What If I Can't Cope? I know it is on the AFAC website in the Mental Health and Wellbeing library as well. So if people are wanting to access that, they can get in touch with me. Finally, can you provide more info links on the underpinning models you used, such as 5 Ways to Wellbeing, the mental health continuum, etc.?
Sure.
Yes, we can ask Lisa to check those out, because we've used, so the 5 Ways to Wellbeing is on the New Zealand Mental Health Foundation website, so if people want to just look that up. And Te Whare Tapa Whā, as long as you get the spelling right, there's lots of articles about that. But yes, we can provide those. And the mental health continuum is used, came from the Defence Force in Canada. It was their model, but it's also used by the Defence Force in New Zealand. So there's lots of information about them, but yes, I'm sure we can provide links.
Thank you very much. And I think that is all we have time for. So I would like to thank again Alison, Andy and Brendan for joining us today. It has certainly provided everyone with a lot to think about. On behalf of AFAC and Stewart and Heaton, thank you for joining us. At the end of this session, you will be asked to complete a short survey. We will use this information to ensure our professional development events program continues to meet your needs. It has been our pleasure to host this event today. Until next time, everyone, stay safe, stay well.